Jim Collison, we're back here live from Heartland Developer Conference 2016 here in Omaha, back with one of my old buddies, Ramzi Yassine from Hudl, now working at Hudl as a Gallup employee for a lot of years. But Ramzi, welcome to the interview.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. Let's get a little background on you, who you are, where you're from, what you've done, favorite language to develop in. I know all those answers, but
no, you're fine.
But for the audience at home, let's hear from you.
So I started 13 years ago developing software for a healthcare company, and I was mostly on the backend servers dealing with some legacy database language, some backend, but mostly the backend was Java. And then I moved to Gallup, where I met you.
Yeah. We started around the same time.
Absolutely.
At Gallup, yeah,
for like around 8 years. And there, I was in charge of like the team that did the framework for the surveys, the web surveys that Gallup pushes, and was there also as a Java developer.
Yeah, and a huge enterprise framework at that, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it was a super important.
Yeah,
that's our bread and butter.
Exactly, yeah. And we allowed a lot of people in the organization to write surveys within minutes and push them to production, and that was very important. Instead of like developing the survey as a programming language. So we pushed it off, and that got a lot of huge success. And then after that, worked on the reporting side of things, mostly also Java Shop, Oracle database kind of deal, and different flavors of JavaScript on the front end.
Yeah, and today for Hudl, what's your role there?
For Hudl's backend is more C#, so it's more .NET, and I work there in the foundation department. We call them tribes. And the role of foundation at Hudl is to basically have that empower all the feature squads, so teams that work on basketball, soccer, football, all that stuff, to be able to help them innovate easy. There's a lot of challenges with microservices where Hudl has a big microservice architecture, and there's a lot of decision that kind of you have to make to work in that model. And we don't want, like, there's a lot of cognitive load on a developer to like think, okay, if I'm going to push this code to Australia, is it going to work the same way if it pushes in the States?
Yeah.
So it's unfathomable for one developer to think about all these things. So we basically have this department that helps out with the AWS infrastructure, that helps out with creating these libraries that all the feature squad use.
Yeah, you said
services.
Mm-hmm. For the folks at home who may not know what that means, can you give me a 2-minute definition of that?
Yep, more than happy to. So imagine that you're trying to build an app, and it has a shopping cart, and you're selling really awesome socks. So I have really bad examples.
There's never enough socks.
Yes, exactly.
Never enough cool socks.
Yeah, especially the ones that look like each other, right?
Yes.
But basically, when you're like a 4-team people that are like, developing, QAing, you build all that, the shopping cart application, the listing of all the socks, and you put them all in one app, and you expose it to the world, and now you're having a lot of clients. As your organization keep growing, you have more developers, more QA, more project managers, and the more you have to work on this one little application, there's going to be a lot of organizational obstacles in front of you to deploy code, and also problems with like, hey, I'm going to release this code, but I don't know that this is affecting this, and now the site is down. So with microservice architecture, it promises you like to break out all these your application into like little services. And when I say little, I don't mean like little as from line of code, but just like a way where you can reason about like this service does the shopping cart part.
Right.
This service is going to be the listing service, and this is the service for the inventory and stuff like that. And then in a way now, the users don't know that you have that architecture, but now you're more resilient. As your organization keeps growing, you can say, okay, this team is going to have ownership, temporary ownership to like 1 or 2 microservices instead of them being responsible for the entire app.
Right. Yeah, more scalable, right, from that
Absolutely.
standpoint, and you're able to get, and you might have some specialists in some of the areas that understand the architecture of each one of those pieces.
Absolutely.
But the framework can be flexible enough that you can bring anyone in because they're built in a standardized way, right, that you can bring other folks in to work on it as needed and share across stuff.
You totally hit on the nail there. Like the most important thing, and I know that there's some organizations that want to do more heterogeneous versus homogeneous microservices, and we try to be on the homogeneous side a bit, where like if I'm working on microservice A today and somehow I'm moving to another, I can understand like from day one that, oh, this is what happens in microservice B, and then like switch over.
Yeah, some consistent architectural designs, right, that work standardized across them. And that's not always possible, right?
No,
it's just
exactly.
Sometimes the software just has unique constraints associated with it, and you can't do it that way. But I think that's the hope, right? We've been hoping for that stuff for a long time. Sometimes it works great. Sometimes not so great from that standpoint. So your excuse me, your session then, which when again? Is tomorrow?
Yeah, it's tomorrow.
Tell me what it is again.
Absolutely. So the name of that session is bless you, Globalization as a Service.
Yes.
So now, and I will emphasize in the talk that this is not just a talk for globalization and a microservice architecture, but I'm going to share with the audience like our experience at Hudl when it came to the question of globalization. So Hudl as a company is a software company where coaches and athletes are interacting on the site. It was very big in American football, but now we're expanding to basketball, volleyball, and now we're talking soccer. So we're talking more international clients.
The real sport, right?
Exactly. In my humble opinion.
Finally, the real sport.
In my humble opinion. I'm sure
Which
a lot of
football,
people in Nebraska
actually.
Yes. I've grown calling it football until I came to the States, and it's like American football. Absolutely.
We stole that. It should have been football, but anyways. So you're moving into different sports, right? And so that's and especially when we think of soccer or football, that is really global. I mean, so now we're moving every single country around the world. So the problems are different, right? Because what are the fundamental problems for you guys?
So right now, if let's say I'm a soccer team in Italy, and I open the Hudl app, like I'm assuming that there's going to be some disappointment where like this is not in my culture. So and it's the same thing like when let's imagine that you're going to another website and it's all like, let's say Arabic or Chinese or something like that. You're like, you don't feel at home in your culture, and that's where like globalization is about more user experience than architecture itself.
I see.
So that's very important, and a lot of developers are like, oh, that's the one thing I don't like to deal with. You know, and in my previous job, we had to deal with that problem because there's a lot of clients that deal with all that stuff. Even at my healthcare job, we had to even globalize the log files because the data centers might be in France, and they want to see their logs. So they're definitely very level. So the business need to figure out what the globalization strategy is, but it's very important for you to tackle it. And now, when it comes to microservice architecture and also like foundation, where the department I'm working at, how can I introduce globalization without stopping 300 deploys a week on production?
Right.
So how can I come up with a library that does not add too much a cognitive load, too much obstacles for a developer in soccer? Because if I tell them like, hey, by the way, to do globalization, you have to follow these 100 steps. They'd be like, no, we're going to work on our features because that's part of our roadmap. Right. We're not going to work on globalization and stuff like that. So that's my talk is going to be about that journey and how we could have made it really bad, or and it's yet to be tested because it's something we've done. Like we started in November, and the libraries have been like there since March, and people are using them today and stuff like that. But of course, we'll see if it stays the test of time.
You're still early, so you don't know. But what was the secret sauce from your standpoint of how? So you had that problem. How'd you overcome it? How'd you make that work?
Yeah, no, very good. So what we ended up doing, instead of creating, so that Hudl today is sitting on 50 microservice, where we're not Netflix where they have like 200 and 300 microservice, but so looking at the scale of things, we have 50 microservices. We could have easily created like an SDK, software developer kit, which is just a library that we would tell all of our squads and teams like, hey, you have to install it, and good luck on the translation management. Just you deal with it, right? We could have done it that way, but I was more adamant on, like, me and my team were adamant on like creating it as a service, as another microservice that sits across all these other services. And we basically build a small little client library that we install in each of these microservices to do the calls.
Interesting.
And in that call, we guarantee resiliency, which is a a big problem, right? Because let's say you're showing a coach the video player page, and then all they see is like unavailable text or something weird, or maybe the page is not loading for them because globalization. So we dealt with all these problems, I hope. And so this is me showing, like, even at the architecture level, how we able to create a service, be a bit resilient, and how we store the data. And also I'll be talking about translation management as how we solve that.
So one, don't worry about these guys being loud over here, because we're way louder than they are in these microphones, which is good. Sherry likes to do this to me from time to time. Last year they were really loud too. So really, translations becomes a service instead of it, because sometimes we often think, or globalization, right? I think of it in terms of translations, because it's almost mostly about the language pieces, but there may be some cultural pieces associated, right? From that standpoint, but it is really taking you instead of spreading those out across the top and creating another layer on top of it, you've turned that into a service itself. And so when it needs it, it calls that, brings it in, changes it to the site, and displays it. Is it that simple?
Yeah. Well, I wish everything is that simple. Right?
Like just say yes, Ramzi. Yes,
the devil's in the details, right? So basically,
I'm a manager. I want you to just tell me it's simple, and you'll have it done tomorrow.
Yeah, done tomorrow. Absolutely. We part of the talk also is my PM was pushing me and my other developers to what does an MVP look like, and I'll have a couple of minutes in the talk to talk about like what MVP looked like.
Yeah.
This is where I said, you know what, we don't need a Mongo database. We don't need all that stuff. Let's just have a JSON file in our service and it has the translation. And sorry, it doesn't have anything but English right now, but I'm not going to worry about the translation management.
But that can be replicated later, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you can add on to that later. If you can get the English part right, then it's just, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and that MVP, like, so we started, our squad/team was formed in November, and we were able to present before Christmas. So that's like less than a month to say, hey, we actually have a service, an API, to get translations, and also we have a proof of concept in one of our basketball pages. So we went to the basketball service and updated a couple of things, and we learned from our mistakes, like, oh, this is too tough. A developer's not going to do this. So we went back and forth, kind of like an iterative approach, which is harder when you're thinking of a platform. A lot of people, when they hear MVP and they're a developer, they shake their heads like, oh, PM now, right? And stuff like that. But in reality, it's a really good, because you don't want to spend 6 months, a year working on something and then you're not helping your users. Right. Your users have to be your focus kind of deal. So this iterative approach with the platform helped us a lot. And I'll be talking a bit about that one. And from a translation management system, so there was an interesting debate in our squad. Do we build the translation management? And the developer side of me always says, yes, I want to build it. Of course I want to build it because, But really, we looked into a lot of third-party, and we found OneSky, which is it's called oneskyapp.com. Okay. And we use them as our translation management. So basically, when people are hitting our service, we don't do any calls to that service. But when we want to do translation, all of our text gets synced in a job basis every, let's say, night or every week, goes back to OneSky. And if you want to do more translations, one of us on Hudl, so have a credit card, and then translation all there. And that
is that on demand?
Basically, okay. So the services, they host a website. So you pay for that subscription, like because you have users logging in. But it's nice because it not only shows the translations, it also gives you context. And context is everything in translation.
Right. Oh yeah.
I have a couple of funny examples from the different jobs I held, but like one of them, like the word feed, when an athlete goes and looks at their feed, if you just take that into French, it becomes to eat, right? So when they look at that, so it's like, no, Hudl is not a food application. So but when you
you're translating titles and
navigation
headers
items
and the whole shoot match.
Exactly. Okay. And so when a translator sees the word feed, like, I don't know what you're talking about. But with OneSky, you're able as a company to take a screenshot and show them, by the way, feed is here and it shows these things. And now the translator has knowledge, like, oh, I know what you want to do here.
Yeah.
So sometimes like we like to blame the translators because they're not doing their job correctly.
No, it's
but
really hard.
It's really
hard
hard
work.
So context is really the big thing. So that, personally, that's what sold me on it, because like when I was thinking of translation management, I was thinking of an application, credit application. Like I'm like, wait, I have to work on the context, and this company had it all figured out.
Wow.
Kind of deal.
Yeah, the language bit, I mean, is I think one of the hardest problems to overcome when we think about moving our software outside of a country and moving it into other ones.
Absolutely.
Because context, like you said, is so difficult. And we find this in StrengthsFinder. You came across this a lot when you were with us, and I come across it now as I work with the coaches in the coaching community. Even in certain countries, they'll look, Germany, in one in particular, very exact language, sort of, between north and south. That's a little bit different. And the northern folks will say, no, that doesn't mean what you think it means. And then the south, oh, no, and it's just a super big challenge. So it's
the dialect. And that's why we try as much as possible not to use the word language, but to use the word locale or culture. If you're coming from a Java background, you call it locale. .NET calls it culture. And because I'm coming from both, and I always interchange them and make people confused. But you always go down to the dialect level. It's like, hey, this region has a culture. So let's say Arabic, Egypt is different than Arabic, Lebanon, for example. Same thing like your example with Germany, for sure. But and
interesting.
I love that you mentioned Germany, because it's always like, to me, is one of the
like them in the World Cup.
Absolutely.
Let's be
I go crazy
totally
for
transparent.
Them. We didn't do good this European Cup. We'll have our chance. Really good team. Also there's a lot of design decision that has to be made. Because normally, like, the average length of a German word is larger than English. So when somebody is building a UI for users, you have to also account for that. So I mentioned in the talk some testing methodology that you can get out of the box without even translating to German, what you can do for that.
Well, we were in StrengthsFinder, Thai is a language that just is one long string of words. And we just fixed that. I mean, there was, when we would print a PDF out of your old system, it would run off and so we did the company we use fixed some things, and now it doesn't work. But that's, I mean, you think about that, that's a completely different system than we think of when we think of English. As we get more and more global, and I don't know if we can get too much more global than we are today when we think, I mean, we're there, right?
Absolutely.
Super important when we think about moving our apps into that environment. They quickly leave the borders. Right? I mean, quickly leave the borders. I'm interested in this service because that is a really hard problem to solve in a lot of cases. And I think the speed to it, sometimes we approach it from a pure translation standpoint, but it sounds like instead of a straight up translations, you're calling a cultural service. Like, hey, no, locale. I like the way you're calling a locale, right? Where am I? And then how does it know what does it use to know where it's calling from, so to speak, from a locale standpoint?
So basically, there's a couple of things. So I'll talk about the Hudl side and then the OneSky app side. But basically, when right now, and this is still part of our MVP. Basically, right now, when you, Jim, are logging into Hudl, the browser is telling us that, hey, you're coming in from this locale. The browser tells us. And we use our best ability to match your locale with we have some configuration that tells us, okay, here's the best locales that we support today. And we fall back on English. So basically, this is when we don't have your locale. I'm sorry, you're going to see English, right? Until we have more translations. But the nice thing is we offload that process away from the devs, and let's say the PM or even the business development person can I got this. Here's the tools that I can do. So that's one. Number two, that methodology might not work for every company. If you go to Travelocity, they have that language selector. Gallup, my old team, we also had the language selector is a big deal there too.
No, right on.
And I wasn't sure if we need to push the language sector early on, because is it MVP, is it not MVP? But then the really important problem that we saw is we were rolling Hudl in English UK, and I didn't know that. I should probably know that, but basically 40% of users coming from the UK still tell us that they're English US. So then I'm like, oh man, this methodology does not work. So this is where we kind of like maybe use the IP to give us some hint on like, hey, I know the browser is telling you they're EN-US, but the IP is looking from the UK and stuff like that. So we haven't iterated too much on that until we see more globalization kind of deal before we spend all the all the time in investing and all that stuff.
Yeah. So when do you launch on this thing, or is it already launched? Are you using it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question. So it's been on production since I want to say February of this year, and right now we have we've covered, like, of course, the US, and we've covered the UK. Now, is all of our microservices localized? The answer is no. So, but like we have the majority of them and like set up. And the most important thing, we as a foundation group give the tools for the microservices to make the decision on when to go versus not to go based on their timeline. But we're trying to do a really big push where like, localization for all new features is a must now. Yeah. It's going to be tough with the old legacy stuff. As
legacy, that damn legacy.
Because of the ownership, right? Like,
yeah.
Like if somebody doesn't own X, so who's going to fix X kind of deal?
Yeah. No, that's always the hard part. You figure out later the right way to do it, and then you're like, ooh, how do we back out?
Yes,
all that stuff.
Exactly.
That stuff that we did a long time ago.
And Hudl is always in a like changing phase, and we're giving our coaches like new products. So there's a lot of products that we're actually phasing out.
Right.
So the legacy problem might be just like, we actually don't have to globalize it because there's a couple of users using it or percent of using it, and most of them are in the US, so that's okay. It's all about the user experience. When we have a lot of partnership with the Premier League, is the user experience they're good? That's what we should be looking at, kind of deal.
No, awesome. Very good. Anything else you'd add to that? As we the time goes super fast, and we probably talk too much.
No, absolutely.
Up front, good to catch up with you. Anything else?
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me in the talk, and we'll look forward for anybody who wants to ask any questions about globalization.
I think it's a huge and a hard problem, and I think we're getting better at it, but I think we're going to need to continue to come up with some super smart ways. Certainly, the planet is not going to go to one language, so we are going to have to learn.
Sometimes I hope.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that are hoping it's not English, right? But could you speak? You speak more than one.
English is my third language.
And so what's your first?
My first is Arabic. And then French, which I unfortunately lost most of it because I don't practice it. And English.
Then English, the third, Well, there's a lot of people who would not want English from that standpoint. But I think I think we used to write or code to regional, and I think now you almost have to develop global first. Absolutely. If that makes sense, right? From that standpoint of used to be PC or mobile first, and now there's no question you're mobile first in almost all cases, and then now it's almost global.
And it's not only it's not only just what the users are seeing, like from the UI perspective and the culture, also like I have users from Australia. How is their performance experience? Let's say I'm a data center in one place in the world. Like, how does that work for them? So it's a really interesting challenge, and I never thought about like geographical scope until like really recently.
And what do you do with German-speaking people in Brazil? And what do you do with French-speaking people in Nigeria?
Exactly.
Right. It's the browser may not give you the
what feels
clue.
comfortable for them.
Right on. So Ramzi, thanks a ton. Hang tight for 1 sec.